Hi class, this is Professor Montgomery. I hope you're all well. I'm here to help you through the final research paper student example that I have posted in week 13 of our class on eConestoga. So this is actually a paper that was handed in by a student of mine in baking and pastry arts, and I got her permission to use it. I've updated and revised it a little bit, but otherwise this is a legitimate student paper and one that you can use as a model or an example. First of all, the student was in baking and pastry arts, so it makes sense that her topic has something to do with baking, and in this case she focused on Quebec's traditional desserts, or rather the historical influences on Quebec's traditional desserts. And this word influences simply means what have been the major factors that affected Quebec's traditional desserts. So what have been these factors? And so for that title, she's included a header, and as you know, the header needs to be in all caps, okay? I believe I may have posted another version where the header was not in all caps. It does need to be in all caps, and here it's a truncated version of this title. So it's simply Quebec's traditional desserts as a header, and here we have the page number in the top right-hand corner, which you also need. Okay, now if you go to where this assignment is posted under Content and Assignments and Week 13 Research Project Final Report, you'll find an APA at Conestoga template, and that template will help you through including all of your own information on a properly formatted template. This is where you can include your own title, your own name, your own student number, college reading and writing skills. You could also include COM 1085 there if you like. You don't have to, but you can. My name, if you want to make it clear, you can write Professor there and then the date that it's due. Okay? Very good. Now let's take a look at this paper. So here we have the establishing information, and this is basically simply introductory information. This helps the reader to get oriented, to get warmed up. It helps you to introduce the topic and bring them to what you want to say about that topic. So here we're talking about Quebec, early Quebec, how it was inhabited by French explorers and by Indigenous people. And then we bring us down to the thesis statement, which is what you're trying to prove in this paper. So we have here, to this day, the main influences on traditional Quebec desserts include those of early French settlers, the Indigenous peoples they had contact with, and the natural ingredients from the land. So we have these three different factors that affected the historical or rather traditional desserts in Quebec. Okay, so the research question here was probably something like, what have been the major factors that affected the traditional desserts in Quebec? And this would be the student's answer to that question. So the thesis statement is your answer to your research question, and it comes at the end of your introduction. So here's your introductory material, and here's your thesis statement. Good. Now this student has chosen to include headers. So they've included a type 1 heading at the beginning of each new body paragraph. So here we have French origins as the header, and here we're going to talk about the first main influence on Quebec's traditional desserts. The groundwork for traditional Quebec desserts was laid by the recipes French colonizers brought with them from France to North America. Okay, so here we're talking about the influence of those French colonizers. And you'll notice that here the student has used quite a few very good supports. They've used examples, facts, statistics, but here we have a a quotation. And you'll notice that the quotation is quite short. It's all been enclosed within quotation marks, and it includes a citation at the end. Now remember, I am expecting you to use only very short quotations if you do choose to use quotations. And I want this paper to be primarily your own work and your own writing style. If you do include quotations, they should be short and they do need to have a citation here. Okay, and the citation here is going to include the author's last name, the year of publication, and the paragraph or page number. Now, in this case, the student has included the section, and that's fine. It depends on the type of source. So the type of source that you are citing will affect the citation that you include. Usually, it's just the author's last name, the year of publication, and the paragraph or page number, but it could include other components depending on the type of source. So make sure to check APA at Conestoga to discover what, in fact, you do need to include in that citation. But remember, whenever you use a quote or exact words from a source, you need quotation marks around those exact words and a citation afterward. Remember, be very careful not to include anyone else's work in your work unless you have those components. Okay? If you're paraphrasing, you would not need the quotation marks, but be careful not to over-paraphrase. I really want this to be mainly your own work in your own writing style, your ideas presented to me. Okay? Very good. All right, let's take a look. In this paper, the student has chosen to use illustrations, which is fantastic. I love it. Just make sure to include a citation after each of your illustrations if you choose to use them. You definitely don't have to use them, but it does add some nice color. Here we have the second body paragraph. So we've got type 1 headings separating each of the body paragraphs in this paper, which is a great idea. You can use only type 1 headings if you want to. Just remember what you need to include with type 1 headings. It needs to be in bold, it needs to be centered, and the first letter of each important word here needs to be capitalized. Okay? Good. Here is the topic sentence for the second body paragraph. Contact between the French and Indigenous peoples also influenced the flavors of traditional desserts in Quebec. So we have the two components that you need in a topic sentence here. We're referring to the main idea, which is the influences on the traditional desserts in Quebec, and we're including the main supporting point. What has been a second influence? A second influence has been the Indigenous peoples who were there when the French arrived. Okay, so these people had an influence on those traditional Quebec desserts. Okay, and we'll find out in this paragraph that the Indigenous peoples were the ones who helped the French understand how to sweeten their desserts using maple sugar, using maple sap, and maple syrup, as well as berries. Okay, so we get to, and there's another lovely illustration, making sure to include that proper citation, which is very simple. You simply need to go to APA at Conestoga and find out how to cite an illustration. It's not difficult at all. If you wanted to do that, great. So our third body paragraph is locally available ingredients, and the topic sentence is locally available ingredients clearly had a major impact on Quebecois desserts. Great. So this is our final influence on those traditional desserts from Quebec, and this is where we find out about how that maple sugar was used and how those berries were used. Okay, and another illustration. Good. That brings us to our conclusion, and the conclusion also has a type 1 heading, which is great. This is where we remind our reader of the main idea and those three most important supporting ideas. Okay, so here we have the traditional desserts in Quebec have been influenced by a number of factors. That would be our main idea. And then we would give our three most important supporting points. Most importantly, French colonization, the indigenous peoples, and locally available ingredients shaped the traditional desserts known in Quebec today. Great. And then we end with a final thought. And here, the final thought is a prediction. The writer says, without the influence of even one of these factors, Quebec's dessert landscape would be very different. Okay? It's just a very basic final thought. You can have a more complex one if you want to, but remember that final thought can often come as a prediction or a suggestion for your readers or a broader recommendation for organizations or businesses or governments. Great. So that brings us to our references page. And here, this writer has decided to include quite a few references. You don't need to do that. You need at least 3 references on your references page for your paper. And you need to have included at least 3 references with citations in your paper. So your references page would look something closer to this. Okay, and you'll notice that references is indicated as a type 1 heading, and you've already likely included this in your outline. So if you need to make any changes, make sure to make those before you hand in your final paper. But always notice that you're going to list your references according to the author's last name and alphabetized. Okay, so in alphabetical order. Oh, look at this, A, B, C, D, E. We found a mistake here, haven't we? So this should actually be here. And if you make a mistake like that, you can in fact make that change on your own. Okay, very good. Just remember to include the hanging indent. Each reference usually has a component that includes italicized words, so make sure you know where that's supposed to be. Remember, each reference is different according to the source. So you need to go to APA at Conestoga, look up the source, and discover how, in fact, you need to reference that source. For example, this first one doesn't have an author's last name. It has the publisher. Sometimes you need to include the publisher instead of the author's last name if you don't have an author. Each one also includes a retrieval statement that is properly punctuated, so you need to use punctuation properly. You need to also include the date properly. So remember to include that retrieval statement with the date that you retrieved the document from the internet and a complete URL. Okay, that's all. I hope that made sense. Please let me know if you have any questions at all. You can send me an email at mmontgomery@conestogac.on.ca, and make sure to take care of yourselves.